inside the Mead Makers studio, where we explore mead making, interview mead makers from around the world, and catch the buzz on some of the best meads around. My name's TK, and this is the channel TK and Drinks. I appreciate y'all being here today. Tonight I'm going to be speaking with Mr. Erik Newquist of Aesir Meadery out of Everett, Washington. So I did a stint up in Washington, a little mead trip up there a couple summers ago, and I got the fortunate pleasure of meeting Mr. Erik Newquist, and looks like he's joining in right there, and I guess I'll finish that story when we get Erik on board with us. Technical difficulties, and we do every other week, and apparently that's not going to be the case today. Because why would it be? What's up? What's going on, everybody? Thank you guys again for popping in. Always appreciate when people have the opportunity to watch live. Yeah, Erik, it's not accepting. Let me see here. I don't know what it took last time for it to hook up. It always does this goofy thing where it never hooks up. I don't know. It seems to be intermittent. I'm not quite sure why that happens and why it doesn't happen, to be honest with you. Steven, appreciate you popping in. Three Hands Mead. We are trying to get Aesir Meadery popped in here, and we're having our nice standard technical difficulties. Wouldn't be TK and Drinks interview without that. Yes, success. What is going on, Erik?
Not much, man. How you doing?
I am doing phenomenal. As something that most people are not going to know, Erik and I have been trying to set this up for probably about the better part of 2 years now.
It's been a minute, yeah.
Yeah, so as I was saying before, right when you popped on, I did a little mead vacation up to Washington with my family about 2 summers ago, and we had the pleasure of meeting and got to spend some time together. And we've been trying to link up since then, and life happens. But here we finally make it. I take this as actually some sort of like boon or portent
Right.
of good things to come.
It's only been a minute. It's fine.
It's perfectly fine. So. We got some people popping in already. Gotta love that. Why don't you go ahead and give yourself a little quick introduction, and then we'll get into the meat and potatoes of it.
Sure thing. So my name's Erik Newquist. I'm the owner, mead maker, salesperson, floor sweeper, delivery driver, fruit picker for Aesir Meadery. I started back in college. My degrees are microbiology, chemistry, and philosophy. Kind of found an old family recipe for mead and went to the apiary on campus and said, hey, I found this recipe to make alcohol out of honey. And the beekeeper's like, hey, follow me, and walked me out to the hives and started pulling frames up and brushing the bees off with his bare hands and knocked it into buckets and said, have fun, let me know how it turns out.
Wow.
And it turned out really good.
Nice.
So I just kind of kept doing it. I tried making beer, and beer is kind of boring. I mean, it's watching water boil all day. The best part about making beer is having beer to drink with friends while you're making beer.
Right.
Wine was kind of fun for a minute, but again, it's still just wine. So, like, blind taste test, you could put beer in front of someone, doesn't matter what the style. Same thing with wine, and I'm going to know that it's beer or I'm going to know that it's wine. But
right.
with mead, everything's possible. So.
True.
I love kind of just the science part of it and the experimenting and trying out new things. So I just kind of started putting some science and research and testing and all kinds of other stuff to it, and did it for years and years, just kind of as a hobby and for fun. So get invited to a party, bring some mead, happy birthday, here, have some mead. And I changed careers a few different times. I was a tooling design engineer at Hewlett Packard. I worked at prototype and R&D there. I had my own IT business for a while. I was a global manager of operations for a telecommunications company. I was a sales manager. And so all along, I've just been kind of collecting all these different skills to start a business.
Right.
And when I got laid off in like 2012, when I applied for unemployment, they're like, yeah, you're overskilled. You're not going to find a job. So you should start a business. Go have fun. And I'm like, well, what the heck should I do? And I kind of pulled bunch of my friends are like, you should do mead because we want that more than like a birthday or a holiday or a party or something. And at the
Nice.
time, there was like 100 meaderies in the country, and I thought that's not a terrible place to be. So kind
Yeah.
of went down the path, and at the time, it was like 4 years for most people to get through the licensing process. It was super ridiculous.
Whoa.
I ended up getting through it in 2 years, um, and it's kind of been running full steam ahead ever since.
Right.
I built my business around taking care of my kids. I have a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old.
Yeah.
Um, and everything was kind of built around them and making mead. And about 95% of all my ingredients are from here in Washington State.
Nice.
So I know all my farmers and my producers and my growers. I have relationships with everybody so that, like at farmers markets, because they do a lot of those,
Hmm.
at the end of the day, if they have something that doesn't sell, that I can turn into mead. And if it's going to go bad before it goes bad, I'll just buy it from them. So they always sell out. I always get dibs on whatever they get that's like above and beyond.
Right.
Um, so it's been like a really good relationship, and it's made it fairly easy to always have something available. The challenges
That's nice.
tend to it is super nice. The challenges tend to be like volumes of things.
Right.
So batches tend to be either big or small, but it varies from season to season, and everything is basically seasonal. So there's very few things that I make year round. Traditional is one of them.
Sure.
And then stuff with like herbs, spices, teas, coffees, things like that, because I can get that all the time.
Right.
But everything else just kind of depends on the season.
And that's really cool because like I anybody who follows you, especially your friend, personal page and everything like that, but you're always out doing something out at the farm, harvesting fruit or out foraging.
Yep.
You're always doing something that's putting your love and passion into your product.
I find
And
it
you're
turns
pretty
out
much, you said, a
better.
one-man operation
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. I'm super picky.
As you should be. I mean,
Yeah,
that's what it takes to make a quality
yeah,
product, in my opinion.
I think so.
Stephen, yeah, I think so too. Stephen, one of my loyal watchers, I appreciate him all the time, says, yeah, TTB has streamlined, and that's very true. So you're
Yeah,
saying at the time it was 4 years was the standard. You got it done in half the time at
right.
2, and now there's meaderies that are starting planning, now, say, or just this summer, say like August, and that are planning on
Yeah.
being open in less than 12 months. I mean, that's
That's
insane.
bonkers to me because I feel like you can't even get through the permitting process at a city to get your occupation stuff in that time period.
Right.
Like that's insane. But
Right.
I
And
mean,
I
if it's more power to them, we need more meaderies. We need more people making good stuff. So,
absolutely. And I say hats off to the government for getting their F's together and,
well, I feel like that's a stretch, but
have a little more together than it was previously. Each time it gets a little bit better. But I
that's
mean,
true.
if they can get it down, and I'm sure that, to be fair, that probably varies a lot from state to state too. The TTB might have their stuff in a row, but if you're state, or then depending on where you're at, county, city, all those different
Yeah.
things, it all just snowballs because some places want them done in a particular order, and then of course you got to have a spot for all this stuff while you're going through this processing. So now you're paying rent potentially,
Yeah.
or a lease or something on a place. Ah, dude, I
Yeah, I was
couldn't
hemorrhaging
imagine.
money for about a year while I was waiting for all that stuff to go through.
Dude, that's
It was rough.
bananas. I couldn't imagine. I mean, I can easily see how people get into this thing for, into the low six figures
Yeah.
to start with. It seems almost impossible not to. And I hear lots of stories of people that do. So it's
I
cool to
was
hear that.
way less than that. I
Excellent.
yeah, way less. Because oh, I at the time, I just picked a really inexpensive location because I knew it was going to take a long time, and I knew I couldn't, produce or sell or do anything out of the space until that was approved.
Right.
So I just went with really, really cheap and really easy to access,
Right.
and just started working on like equipment and perfecting recipes and stuff. Because like the old family recipe was fantastic, but pushing a barrel out into the sun for 30 days and then seeing what happens is not really a great way to run a business. So kind of had to throw some
Right.
science at it to
Yeah.
try to figure out the best way to actually make something that was tasty for me, because
Yeah,
honestly, I don't care if anybody else likes it, as long as I like to drink it, because I have to quality control everything.
sure.
I'm happy with whatever goes out the door. I'm just always stoked when somebody else is excited about it too.
Absolutely. And speaking of bringing science into it, you mentioned you have a, a background in molecular biology and
Microbiology and
yeah,
chemistry, yeah.
microbiology and chemistry. I've talked to some other people that have different, chemistry discipline backgrounds. And what is yours in specifically? I'm assuming microbiology, and how do you feel that benefits you in the mead making process?
So originally, I was actually going to school to be a doctor. So all
Right.
of that
Yeah.
was kind of geared towards going that direction with it. Um, my mom ended up being in the hospital, and I didn't really, or I got to do a lot of job shadowing, is basically what happened, because I got to see what was going on and kind of get a feel for what my job would look like if I continued down that path.
Right.
Uh, at the time, I was accepted into OHSU in Portland,
Oh,
and I hadn't taken my cats yet. Um, and basically, I just decided that's not where I wanted to be, because it didn't seem like it was helping people get better. It was just like
hmm.
providing symptom recovery or something like that.
I
And
see what you're
I
saying.
just wasn't into that. So,
I got you.
and then I didn't want to get stuck in a lab. I did a lot of lab work that was actually super interesting during college. Um, just lots of really fun stuff that didn't really have a lot of, there's a lot of hurry up and wait kind of things. So you'd come up with
Yeah.
an experiment of some kind, and then you have to order like primers for DNA replication and PCR and all that other kind of stuff. And then you'd have
Get all
to,
your reagents in.
right. It was this big long process, and that's boring to me. I like experimenting, and I like things that are a little bit more fast paced. I have to be challenged. I need something that's going to keep me busy.
Gotcha.
So ended up not doing that, and just changed careers a few different times because I got bored.
Right.
Yeah,
But how does what you've learned, and if at all, I guess I should say,
it
how does
does.
that play to your mead making? What would you say is like been the biggest benefit into your mead making process from that education?
So the biggest thing is probably like yeast cultivation.
Okay.
A
Wow.
lot of that is it's microbiology. It's
Right.
it's like nutrient additions, it's pHs, it's uh,
Yeah.
basically maintaining colonies of microorganisms, and
Perfect.
that's most of it.
So
Uh,
how?
the chemistry side of it is like cleaning reagents, or um, even stuff like dealing with just fruits. So, what's a good example? Strawberries. Strawberries are
Okay.
like 93% water. So, technically, adding strawberries to something, you're diluting the mead that you're making, because you're adding more water than you are adding sugar.
Got you. Okay.
So, to offset that, if I want to keep that balanced, I have to do a calculation to figure out how much extra honey to add to offset the extra water that I'm adding from fruit.
Right. And now, wow. Okay. See, now that's some stuff I had. I mean, I guess you kind of think about it subtly in the background, but when when it's put blatantly in your face like that and worded suchly,
Well, and it's different
that's
when you're on like when you're working on like a desktop and you've got 1 gallon, 2 gallons, 3 gallons, 5 gallons, 10 gallons even. It's not a huge
yeah,
difference. But when you
sure,
start
your
talking
displacement isn't
about
going to
like,
be
well, yeah, and when you're talking about like hundreds of pounds of berries, that's suddenly a significant amount of water that you're adding.
right. Because
So
like
on a
my
big
ignorant
scale, it
self,
matters.
yeah, in my ignorant self, I'm thinking you've got juice. Juice is 100%, because you're squeezing the berries and you're getting
Yeah,
juice out of it, but you're not, it's not concentrated just
right,
100%. I mean, it is 100% strawberry juice, but that juice then contains, like you're saying, a good portion of it being water. So that's
right,
something I had never really considered.
and that's
That's
why when you
that's
buy juices, they're usually from concentrate, because they rip the water out of it to maintain all the flavors and the actual juice parts.
gotcha. And then we'll back, however they
And then
do it to
re-add
get where they want it
water
to
later
be.
to
Right,
reconstitute it. Yeah, it's
right,
a whole
right,
thing.
right. Gotcha. That makes more sense. Now I feel so foolish for having not put that together on my own, but I'm glad
It,
that you educated me.
it and honestly, again, it's really something you only really need to worry about when you start getting into bigger like batches of stuff.
Hmm.
It's like when you're doing things, even with like herbs, spices, or things like that.
Yeah.
Um, on a small scale, you can do, oh, it's 2 tablespoons of this or 12 tablespoons of that. And it doesn't matter if it's like a heaping tablespoon or like an insufficient one,
Right.
because it's just a small amount. But if you start using tablespoons on like a 50-gallon batch and it's 12 tablespoons, that heaping tablespoon is an extra teaspoon times 12 times 50. All of a
Right.
sudden, it's pounds difference, which is
Right.
really
Starts getting
expensive for one.
right.
Yeah, so one of the first things I ended up doing was converting all of the recipes that I've been coming up with into weights instead of volumes, and that made a big difference.
That's how
And
bakers
then figuring
do it, so that
right,
makes sense.
right. Well, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's I don't know, it's fun
No, I
trying to figure out new things.
think I love it, and again, like I said, it makes when you say it like that, it makes so much more sense, especially having that such a close tie to I mean, not tie to it is you're performing chemistry every day when you're making mead and everything, so it makes sense to have knowledge of the functions of those properties. And going back to what you're saying with the yeast, especially being that's a whole microorganism and whole setup and everything like that. How important would you say the yeast, like monitoring temperatures and pHs and all those things, truly are to having yeast produce their best results, or are those things just like a kind of general good guideline to
I
follow?
think it's critical.
Critical.
Temperature specifically is the difference between getting fusel alcohol that burns when you drink it versus something that just warms you because you got alcohol in your belly. Um,
Gotcha.
it's healthy yeast versus unhealthy yeast. It's healthy yeast reproduction versus unhealthy yeast reproduction, and those are all flavors that you don't want. So controlling the temperature so that it's ideal, you make sure that the yeast isn't stressed in producing those flavors. So monitoring
Stress usage.
that's important. Acidity,
What?
I think, is less important only because honey's already acidic, and yeast in general, from my experiments anyway, seems to work much better under slightly acidic conditions. So, like things that have citrus fruits in it tend to ferment faster than things that don't have citrus fruits, so that extra citric
Oh,
acid in there.
gotcha.
There's obviously like too high, too low in there, and it depends on the yeast strain that you're using. But
Sure.
I do think those are super important.
So
Um, yeah.
there's a lot of mead makers out there, commercial home brewers alike, that re say what's the right way to put it, that don't currently use or refrain from using temperature control for their yeasts. What would you say to those people is like the best yeast choice for them? I mean, obviously you have to consider your ambient room temperature that you're going to be working within, but I mean, is there kind of like a general rule of thumb when you don't have temperature control to stick with this type of yeast or types of yeast?
I think my favorite experiment, I'll talk about that first,
Yeah.
is to basically make 6 gallons of mead, break it into 1 gallon containers, and then each container gets a different strain of yeast. And then you treat them exactly the same way. By the end of fermentation, you're going to have different flavor profiles. You're going to have different residual sugars. You're going to have different final alcohols. Your textures are going to be different, like the mouth feel, and your flavors are going to be different. So, in whatever environment you're in going through that experimental process, you're going to find out what works best for your environment that you want to drink.
There you go.
So I think that's important for one, is to go through that process just so you know that you're making something that you want and you're less likely to have like failures. Because I can tell you what my favorite yeasts are, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to work for you. Because like my tanks are all temperature controlled. I can
Right.
control with like heat within zero point 0.1 degrees, and I can ferment anywhere between 45 and 115 degrees Fahrenheit. So
Gotcha.
it really
You have
depends on the yeast that I'm using and what flavors I'm trying to extract from yeast fermentation.
sure.
Um, there are a few generalities, I guess. Like I love Cote de Blanc. It's a Red Star yeast. It's in the green packet.
Yep.
Was it? It's a. There's another name. Was it Premier Cuvée? Is that right?
Sounds about right.
Maybe. Anyway, I love that one for fruits and flowers because it maintains the aromatics and a lot of like the fruity profiles.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. And And
See,
that
I
one's like
like
55 to 65 degrees, which most people can find somewhere in their house that's that temperature. So it's pretty easy at home to manage.
that makes sense. I when I was living in Arizona, I was using Kveik yeast just because I know it,
Mhm.
I could easily find somewhere that was in the 90-degree plus
Right.
range pretty much, steadily and just have it go and rock and roll. Um, I do love your idea, and I'm pretty sure it's probably fairly common practice out there to do those types of uh, bench trials,
Mhm.
so to speak, to see what yeast is going to work best for your preference. And I would really hope that a lot of at least the commercial mead makers out there who aren't using temperature control have at least done something like that and don't just kind of throw caution to the wind and say, well,
I mean,
everybody
there's room for
uses
that too, because you
71B,
can
so
happen
let's
on
just go
stuff.
with that.
Yeah, I don't like 71B at all. At
Right.
all, at all.
Why
Um,
is, yeah,
yeah. I think, well, let me back that up a little bit. I think 71B is good while you're learning
hmm
until you figure out why you don't want to use it.
that's fair
It's
enough.
like bread yeast. It's one of those things that's in a lot of recipes that you find on the internet, and
Yeah,
it's not really a good place to learn from. Um,
agreed.
if you've had some experience fermenting and you kind of get an idea of what you're doing and there's specific flavors that you're looking for, specific profiles,
Yeah,
it's fantastic. If you're trying to make like a gingerbread cookie or a key lime pie or something like that, and you want that like crust flavor, you don't need to throw crust into it. Use a bread yeast because it'll give you that yeasty, bready,
type of
and that texture
characteristic.
and some of those aromatics that you would get from that same thing. So
There you
that would
go.
be a good use of that versus something like a traditional. And then why does this taste like yeast or bready or is that sourdough? What happened? So
Right.
I think there's a time and place for everything, and it kind of depends on what you're trying to accomplish as far as what yeast you want to use, which is why I think the bench trial is probably the best bet. And then
Sure.
repeat that a few different times. And once you figure out a yeast that you like, do the same thing with just that yeast, break it into six parts again, and then experiment with those six parts. So this one gets herbs and spices, this one gets vegetables, this one gets fruits, this one gets flowers, and see what works and what doesn't.
That's a phenomenal idea too, because then you can see how that yeast works with those different flavor
Mhm.
profiles. And say maybe you don't like the way that yeast works with your berries, but you really like the way it works with stone fruits or something like
Right,
that.
exactly.
Yeah, that's a really good idea too. I always try to look when am choosing a yeast, try to look at their little. You can go online and they have like a little flavor
Yeah.
profile wheel or aromatics profile wheel. How accurate do you think some of those are? They fairly, I mean, because these are again being put together by labs and stuff like that, so I would feel like they're
Right.
fairly accurate.
I think they're accurate, but the caveat to that is that's also a laboratory environment. So if I'm in a
Right, that's
lab doing this, this is an ideal circumstance for this yeast. This is what
nominal
it's going to do.
conditions, all
Right.
that.
And that's
Yeah,
not always the same thing as your kitchen in your house
almost never.
or your basement in your house. Right. So there's a difference there. You're not going to
Right.
get ideal situations at home. Even in a
Yeah.
commercial meadery or commercial winery or commercial brewery, you're still not probably going to have those same things unless you have the equipment to do so. And it's really
Right. Which
expensive to get that kind of stuff.
yeah, it certainly can be. I don't see a lot of like since we were talking about temperature control, I don't see a lot of temperature control units for um, home homebrew style stuff. Usually, the stuff that people create is kind of
They
homebrew,
just kind of jank
temperature
it
control
together. Yeah.
units. Yeah,
Well, like
and
SS Brew Tech has a lot of good stuff that has like basically desktop or tabletop homebrewing equipment that's, I mean, you can go as small as a few gallons or all the way up to like a couple of barrels
wow,
and use that at home. And those have like neoprene jackets and heaters. And then they've
wow,
got basically heating or cooling coils on them that you can hook up to glycol. And they have little tiny glycol units that'll run those.
got
But that's
you.
still going to cost you like 6 or 7 grand for the setup. So it's a lot. And you could just
Right.
spend an extra 10 grand if you go commercial and get something that's bigger that's going to do a little bit more work for you.
Right. Yeah, man. And and there's probably people that, I mean, they exist out there, so there's people that do have them and
Hmm.
whatnot. I couldn't imagine like as a home brewer being able to come up on something like that. I mean, I think that would really step up the game and probably explain why there's some people out there who continue to do well in like homebrew competitions and stuff like that because they have that type of it's almost like being commercial while being a home brewer. It's a
Or,
very fortunate place to be in.
right. Or they've just found the yeast that works for their environment and they've kind of
That's true
tailored their
too.
recipes towards their current situation, and then they're using their environment for themselves instead of against themselves.
That's the
Because if I
best
live in a
way
place
to do it.
that's really cold and I'm trying to ferment something that requires a little bit more heat to it,
Right.
it's not going to turn out as good. I can still do
Yeah.
it. I can still get something that's drinkable, but it may have some fusel alcohols or may have some weird aromatics or it may have a weird texture or there might be something that's a little off or at least less than ideal or less than laboratory conditions.
Right. Like you said, it'll be drinkable, but it depends. What are you trying to make? Something that's
Right.
drinkable, or are you trying to make like a nice quality, respectable product that you want to
Right.
give to your friends and families on,
Well,
birthdays
and
and holidays?
it's literally like temperature and like nutrient additions, for example, for
That
that.
was going to be my next
I
question.
figured those two things alone are the difference between having something that is completed fermentation, is done, filtered, ready to bottle in 7, 8 weeks, versus
Right.
something that's not done until maybe next year if you're really lucky.
Yeah,
So
because if anybody follows any of like the Mead, like the Mead like Reddit page or a bunch of the Facebook groups, there's so many people out there that swear that Mead has to
mhm,
sit there for a year before you can drink
that's
it.
it.
It's anything, all these meaderies out there that are selling 8 week old mead or charlatans that are out to take your money and sell you swill.
That's my favorite thing is I love giving it to those guys, like giving them a drink, and they're like, "Oh man, this tastes like it's been aged like 3 or 4 years. When did you make that? It was in a barrel of honey about 7.5 weeks ago." Well, that's not possible. Meat doesn't taste like this that quickly. Well, you're drinking it,
Yeah.
so here's my notebook.
I don't have to tell you, pal. Yeah, so
Right.
that's amazing.
Like I can tell Tom, I
And
know what it says.
yeah, and that's the place where I would really like to be at, regardless of whether, it ends up being this, stellar product I end up selling. But I would just really like to be able to get the process down to where I'm confident enough and have the skill set to be able to brew something consistently in a consistent time frame.
Yeah, that's still coming down to it's practice. It's figuring out what yeast works for your environment. It's that same
Right.
thing. You need to know what's going to work for you, your schedule, your everything. Because if I have a yeast that I need to feed a whole bunch of different times to get it to where I want it to be, that's a
Hmm.
lot of work. And if I'm not consistent with that work, it's not going to turn out the same every time.
Now,
If I'm measuring things like pH, or if I'm not keeping real close control over the temperature, or if I ferment during summer versus winter, there's differences there that are going to happen. And if I don't account for those, I can't make something that's consistent.
right.
With that said, I don't necessarily think that, and I'll have a caveat to this. I don't think that consistent is necessarily important in meat making. I think good is like consistently good is important, but I don't think making the exact same thing every time is important because bees, even if you stick them on the same square footage every single year, we don't control them. So they're going to go to however many billion flowers to get that honey. It's never going to be the same flowers.
Right.
It will always be different. And unless you're blending honeys, which you end up losing all that nuance and all the variability and all of the flavor profiles from that,
Right.
you could make something consistent if you're blending, but if you're not, then it's always going to be different. And that's one of my favorite things is that I know that this year's blackberry is going to be different than last year's. It's going to be different than
Right.
next year's. It's like in wine, that whole terroir thing that they talk about.
Right.
I think in mead, it's even more important because it's more drastic than just the earth that the things are grown in.
Right.
It's this year, there's 20% peach blossoms and 14% dandelions and 38% blackberry or whatever it is. But next year, those
Right.
numbers could be flipped. So you're going to get things that are fruity or caramely or floral or whatever.
And
It's going to change every single year. And I love capitalizing on that to bring those flavors out. I want them different every year.
and the terroir of those flowers plays
Yeah.
into what they produce and well, so it's like you're getting it, but then having exponential factors on top of that. So I like the way you worded that. It's good it's nice to have consistently a consistent quality
Yes.
product, but not necessarily a consistent in a flavor profile, so to speak, or the final flavor. Because then, like you said, if you try to blend something out so much to where you're creating the exact same thing every time, you're really losing the nuances of the honey. Now, there's some people that, like the whole sugar belt style, where it's all about making something big and jammy and
Yeah.
serving it at 1180,
Yeah.
where it's basically ready to go on
Sarah,
your yeah, ready to go on your short
pancake
stack.
it. Yeah.
But yeah, in most people's realm where they're sticking to, the more traditional scale of sweet to dry and stuff like that, the honey characteristic plays it is the role of the mead. It basically it's supposed to carry the rest of the products. The rest of the products are supposed to support the honey,
Right.
not, hinder it or take away from it.
Well, and I think one of the things that's interesting about just the meat industry in general
Hmm.
is if we're talking about like beer and wine, you go to a winery or you go to a brewery because they have a style of beer that you like. So
Sure.
you want the same thing. That's why you go to that brewery or that's why you go to that winery.
Right.
With mead, the questions have always been, well, what's new or what's next or what do you have right now or what's going on this time? What's this seasonal?
Right.
There's a lot more of looking for the variability or the difference or the new flavors, not just, oh, do you have that same old thing again because I want to buy a bunch of it.
Right.
They want to try what's possible, not necessarily just what they like, because there's anything's possible with mead. So I can make something with that tastes like beer or tastes like wine, sweet,
Yeah.
sour, savory, hoppy, bitter, tart. Could do all of it, and
Absolutely.
that seems to be
Basically.
what people look for more in mead than like with beer and wine.
I was thinking, no, I was gonna say, that's not true because people go to breweries for different beers and stuff like that. But you said different styles of beer, so it's like people have their breweries, especially let's say right now IPAs. Have a brewery that you go for. Yeah, they have a lot of different IPAs,
Yeah,
but that's what people go for. And they may have, a lager or a pilsner or a few other things, but they're known for doing this, and that's what people seek
right.
them out for.
So I'm
Yeah,
going to
with
go
the
buy a
meadery world,
case of porter, or they make a really good stout, or they make a good Kolsch or a quad or whatever it
right,
is. That's why you go to that brewery, not to
right,
see what their new flavor is. You might try it, but
right.
you're still there because they make this specific
Right.
style that you like.
Because it's
And
their
it's
new IPA, it's their new
yeah,
sour, it's their new stout or
right.
whatever it is. You're 100% right. It's very. I'm even having a hard time searching through all the ones that I know of a place where people specifically go there because they offer a variety of
Mhm.
stout. I mean, I've been to smaller places, but nobody that's a huge place. That's not like a Sam Adams or something at the
Right,
top scale of the
right.
microbrew level, which
You go
is
to AB InBev or Budweiser because they make Budweiser, not because
right.
they make a good stout.
100%. Yeah, and I guess that's a phenomenal point in case right there. Yeah, that's cool. So and you're right. I think you're 100% right in that as well. And that is what separates the meaderies from the wineries and the breweries is that constant drive for what's new, what's next, what's coming out. And then for somebody like yourself who's out, getting these ingredients personally and then, foraging stuff even literally collecting it on your own and then adding it into stuff that you're making on your own, it really adds another level of uniqueness and I don't know, adds to the terroir of it as well. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a whole it makes it a totally unique, one of a kind type of product. And
Hmm.
it's one of the things that drew me into the mead world. I love stuff that's niche and kitsch
Yeah.
and just totally something you can nerd out on like that.
That's it. Yeah. I love being able to make something different, even though it's technically the same thing.
Right.
Um, something some of us up here in the Pacific Northwest have been, some of us mead makers, I should say, or like commercial.
Yeah.
We're talking about getting together and coming together with a recipe as a group,
Yeah.
and then we all make it in our individual style using the same recipe.
Oh,
And they will all be
gotcha.
different because we have different water, we have different yeast preferences, we have different honey that
Right.
we source, and whatever ingredients we get from different places. So they will be wildly different. And then we kind of want to
Oh,
throw a
yeah.
party at some point where we release all of them at the same time and just do like a vertical and just say, hey,
Yeah.
this is the exact same recipe. Check this out.
Yeah.
We kind of had that this last week at Skull Beer Hall down in Ballard, we had our Mead Fest.
Yes.
We do it twice a year, and we didn't really plan who was bringing what. We just kind of all sent the venue, hey, this is what we're bringing. And like 5 of us brought blackberry meads.
Oh,
Every single
nice.
one of them was different.
Yeah.
So, like night and day different. And it's literally just water, yeast, honey, and blackberries. But they,
Right.
like the flavors, the textures, the aromatics, the color, everything was different.
Yeah. And
And
I have
that's,
to
I
say,
think, my favorite.
as I have to say, to anybody who's in Washington or going up to into Seattle area, you have to stop by Skull Beer Hall in Ballard. That place is amazing. You pretty much catch almost every commercial meadery's mead there from Washington State. Plus, get some really great food,
It's
and it's in
amazing.
a really cool location. The building is awesome, and they are a great staple in the community.
Absolutely. Yeah, they've
So
been great for all the local producers.
yeah, which I think is really cool. So you said 5 of you guys brought blackberry meads, and they were
Yeah,
all so
wildly different.
variantly different, right?
Yeah, because
Um,
I don't remember who had what, but like one of them was like really, really sweet. One of
oh, you
them
got
was a little bit drier. One of them was a
yeah.
little bit more balanced. One of them had like a nice like tart sour. Mine
Mm,
has. I've got some blackberries where I live that are the native species of Washington blackberries, and they grow around a whole bunch of cedar trees. So for
ooh,
some reason, the berries pick up like this resinous cedary flavor. So
ooh,
it tastes like it's been barrel aged, but it hasn't.
that's
So it has
wild.
this like cedar wood, almost like resiny aftertaste after you get.
Yeah.
That's actually what I'm drinking right now. It's this thing.
Ooh, nice. I love
Yeah.
that glass too.
Yeah, me too. It's one of our Walker Art Glass. He's one of our farmers market vendors. He does everything hand blown, and
Hell yeah.
yeah,
Is
and I
that
love it because it's got like the neck on it and keeps all the aromatics inside. It's awesome.
is that a Aesir Meadery glass? That's what I was trying to see if there
Oh,
was like logo on it or
it's not.
something.
It's just a little mushroom
Oh,
glass.
okay, cool. That's even. I mean,
Although I
it's
like it
cool
enough that
regardless.
I actually may have him make some of those for me.
But that's what I was getting at. I was like, does he make
Yeah.
them for the meadery? Can people buy those? I guess I should have went down that road first. But
His
yeah, that
his business is Walker Art Glass. Tell him I sent you, and then he can probably make you something.
very cool. Yeah, see, that would have been wild to have all 5 different those
Mhm.
blackberries because I mean, I I'm from I'm from the area and I have a special place for all those
Yeah.
meaderies up there. You guys all do phenomenal stuff, and I love to see that when regions develop a cohesiveness like that because there's some areas where there's a cluster of meaderies and nobody gets along, nobody does any collabs together, nobody hangs out together or anything like that. It really makes me upset because it's almost like this fake friendship mirroring, animosity, and it's just like, why?
Yeah, well, and there really are. I'm going to say 2 different groups of industry people in mead.
Hmm.
There's the people that are like, "Oh my God, you're going to take my 0.00001 market share. I'm not going to talk to you about anything." And then there's the rest of us that are like, "Not enough people know about mead, and even if you make something that I personally think is terrible, somebody is going to like
Right.
that. They're going to love it. They're going to think it's their most favorite beverage ever. That's
Oh my
okay.
gosh.
There's room for all of that.
Yeah.
And if we work together, we can all be better because we're exposing more people to more possibilities.
Yeah.
Because again, meat is always different. It's not just the one style or just the one thing.
Yeah. I throw a small caveat on that because there's so many people out there that champion their brand of mead. Not say their brand, but the one that they prefer. As far as like the customers grow. Because get traveling around last year and earlier this year, getting to see and meet different
Mm-hmm.
fans of different meaderies and stuff. There's people out there that will just become, um,
Fervent,
bi- uh, I was gonna say ravenous.
yeah, rabid.
Yeah, for
Yeah,
their meadery, and they'll champion their stuff, you know,
yeah.
and if you try to say otherwise, them are fighting
You're the
words, and
bad guy. Yeah,
we're
absolutely.
dukes up.
Yeah, there's a few.
So
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
so as long as people can, like you were saying, look at these things and from it's not even necessarily constructive criticism point of view, but just look at it from hey, I don't like this, it's not for me, but it's for somebody else out there, and that as long as it exists, um, it's doing good and beneficial, and it's advocating for the Mead brand as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even if it's something that I don't personally like, I will still look at it on its merits
What it
as far as
is.
was it a clean ferment?
Right,
Is it what you're presenting it as? Is it that thing? If it is,
right,
then you did a great job because you accomplished what you were trying to produce,
right.
and that's fantastic.
And then it's
Even if
just
I
me
don't
just
personally like it, it's still great.
right.
If
There's no
your
flaws. There's no
fermentation is messed up, if it's clearly been sitting on yeast for too long and it has
Mhm.
that weird earthy taste that is kind of funky, and it's not something that's like an intentional funky,
Right,
or like you clearly had unripe fruit or rotten fruit or something to give you some sort of weird, like you're not paying attention to what you're doing,
right,
then I have a problem with it because then you're actually harming the industry,
right.
not just yourself. Because if somebody comes across that and says, "Oh God, this is meat and this is terrible," I'm
Yeah.
never drinking that again. That's a lot more work for the rest of us to go, "No, no, it's not all like that. You have to try something different." It's
How
just
would
that
you
one.
approach somebody, or how if you come across a situation, what's the best way to approach something like that? Because I feel
Oh,
that
that's
I've
my
come
favorite.
across those situations, and I'm much more novice than yourself, and I feel like I come across those situations, and it's like I want to say something, but I don't have the confidence necessarily. When I'm sitting down at a judging table at a competition, I'm around like-minded individuals,
Mhm.
so I feel a lot more confident. But if I was trying to do that one-to-one, I feel I don't have that confidence.
I think that's where having a little bit of like, we'll call it salesmanship or sales skills come in.
Sure.
So it's the soft skills and being able to talk to people. So you run across that a lot at like farmers markets because you have like your beer and your wine and your other stuff.
Hmm.
And when they walk by and they're like, "Oh, that's mead, that's honey wine, that's super sweet," or "I had this stuff from somewhere and it was terrible, it tasted like this."
Out of my French
It's
basement.
asking questions. It's like, "Okay, so what didn't you like?
Right.
Tell me about your experience with it because I can pretty much guarantee I can find something that you will like." And just engage the conversation like, "Oh, it was too sweet. Cool. I have stuff over here that's not sweet at all. Oh, well, it was too fruity. Cool. I have some stuff over here that's made with tea." Or,
Right.
"Well, I only drink caffeinated beverages. Cool. I've got something with coffee in it." It's that variability or that possibility again, and having just a whole bunch of variation that allows you to pull in other people and change their experience. And I think that's
I
super
would,
important because it's getting people to try it again after they've had a bad experience.
and I completely agree with that 100%. And when I was, anytime I try to bring mead to somebody's attention who has had that similar type of reaction, I agree that those soft skills are definitely the championing thing that's going to get to those people. But I was thinking more along the lines of what happens when, say, now I know as a commercial mead maker, there's been events or places where people have brought you mead that they've made.
Yeah.
Hey, this is my favorite mead I've made,
Uh-huh.
and they bring it to you and it has these flaws in them. How would you use those same skills to break it down to them that hey, this mead isn't what you should be championing and showing to people as a quality mead product?
I think that if somebody is bringing me something that they're proud
Right.
of, I try to be respectful of the fact that they're proud of it. Um,
Sure.
at the same time, I know that they brought it to me because they want feedback. So I'll
Right.
ask that question: "Do you want feedback on this?" And if they say yes, "Do you want all the good stuff? Do you want the room for improvement stuff? What kind of feedback are you looking for?" Because even in my own stuff, there's things that I'm not happy with that
Sure.
can be just nitpicky. But there could also be something where if this is a learning experience for somebody and they genuinely want to get better at what they're doing, they're going to say, "No,
Right.
no, tear it apart. Let me know." And then I
Right.
can get, "Okay, talk to me about your process because here's a flavor that I'm tasting, and then we'll taste it together. That way we're tasting the exact same thing."
Let's
And I'll
walk through
walk
it
them through. I'm
together.
like,
Yeah.
"Okay, so first sip, you get that taste right here. What do you think that is?" And they go, "Oh, I didn't notice that. What is that?" And then we'll talk about what can actually impact that part of your palate. Or do you have that aftertaste? You have that like chalky. Do you taste that? "Well, no, I don't taste that." Okay, so that may be something that you can't pick up on, but because of what I do for work, I taste it, and that might be something that you run into with other people. Here are
Gotcha.
things based off the process that you've given me that can cause that flavor, or that can cause that, we'll call it a flaw, even though it may or may not be, because it may be something that
Sure.
they absolutely love about it. Some people like sours, some people like bitters, some people
Right.
like sweet, some people
But
like savory. Like, everyone's got a different palate, and that's okay.
but here's what's
If it's something that,
causing that situation.
right, so you may give this to somebody and they're going to go, oh my God, and spit it out. This is what causes that, and this is how you could fix that with your equipment, with your process, with your whatever, to make it
Right.
better if you want to. And not necessarily better, but it would get rid of that flavor or change it enough that somebody would not pick up on it. And I
Right.
try to make it like we go through it
Like a
together.
you remind me of like Mr. Wizard. Like you're trying to make it an educational
That's
science experiment for them
it.
because I mean, because people like that type of stuff. And it's not like you're doing it in a condescending
Right.
way. You're doing it in an educational way where you're trying to help them have a better experience, not just now, but for every time they have a mead or whatever beverage that they choose in the future, to look at it a little more critically and
Mhm.
stop and think about what is causing these, flavor profiles, or what's causing this aftertaste,
Yeah.
or whatever.
Well, and I think that's why it's important to go through the experience together. So it's not just here, try the thing, and I try the thing and go, that's terrible, you should do better. Or, oh, that's amazing, you're doing great, keep going.
Yeah.
I don't think either of those are actually valuable. I think both of us sitting there and walking through,
Yeah.
sampling it, smelling it, tasting it, and going through that experience and talking about what flavors we're picking up, what
Yeah.
textures, what aromatics, what those different things are, that
Yeah.
allows you to have a conversation around it that isn't completely negative, because you're both
100%.
going through it. And even if it is feedback, it comes across as positive because you're like, oh, I do taste that. Okay, here's what can cause that.
Right.
And if you like that flavor, that's great. More power to you.
Yeah.
If you don't like that
You want to,
flavor,
yeah.
we can talk about ways to remedy it.
Got you. Yeah. Because, and that's one of the things that I always, um, when I'm going to competitions and stuff, I try to give as much critical feedback, and not just the, wow, this is really good, and certainly not the snobby stuff, or the equally negative
It
stuff.
tastes
This is
like
terrible.
honey.
You should,
Yep.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I could taste the honey in it. Or
Yeah.
what kills me is that the stories that you'll read, or I'll hear from people, is like, somebody I was just talking to last week said that they got a, feedback from a competition, that they had a, mellow mel that they had made with meadow foam honey, and the comment was, you not supposed to use meadow foam honey for mellow mels because it hides the flavor, it mutes the flavor of the meadow foam honey, and they got a degraded score because of that.
And see, I would go back to that judge and have a conversation with them, because that's a preference.
Right.
That's not a judgment on the quality of the product.
Right. And that's, I guess that's what I was getting to, is the amount of judges that you still use preference, and then, like you were also saying, just come with the, not so critical criticisms. That was really good. I liked it a lot. You should make that again, or hey, maybe try, red apples instead of purple apples, or something, completely asinine. It's like, you're not helping me
Well,
here.
I
It's just,
think some of that comes down to how relatively new the actual industry is. So, like, the BJCP
yeah,
stuff is fairly recent for me. It hasn't even been, like, as long as I've been in business, since 2012. It wasn't around at the very beginning.
no,
There
I
were no
think the first
specific
one was
guidelines.
right. I think the first one was like 2015,
Yeah, that sounds about right.
so not even
So
10 years
all of that's
officially.
fairly new,
Right.
and there's not a lot of people that actually have their BJCP to be able to
Sure.
have the conversation and talk about it the right or effective way. So
Right.
it's just off of like homebrew experience, or I've drank a lot of mead experience, which is fine, but it's not the same thing as being able to provide feedback that's critical and helpful at the same time. Because
Right.
I can tell you that I don't like this because I can taste the honey in it, but that's semantics. That's not helpful
Right.
in making me make something better, or helping me do better in my process, or whatever that is. It's just unhelpful. And I think to properly gauge and judge a mead, you need to have the experience to be able to talk about the positives, the negatives, and the ways to improve. It's like in business, you have your like SMART goals. They have to be, specific and measurable.
Right.
If they're not, they're useless. It
Yeah.
doesn't help.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You can't. It doesn't make any sense to set goals and then not track and monitor how you're
Right.
doing. You might as well just be, throwing darts at a wall randomly, not even at the board, so to speak.
Right.
Um, I wonder if wineries and breweries have to deal with that stuff. I mean, their products are significantly more common, but that doesn't necessarily mean that, by percentages that their audience is any more educated on the product. I actually feel like
I
mead is actually the mead drinkers are probably a little more aware
think I would
of, those
disagree.
nuanced things. Oh, really?
Yeah, because like if I'm buying wine,
Hmm.
there's a specific way to do it. If I'm
Right,
having a steak, you know that you're going to get a dry red of some time. It's going to be a Merlot, it's going to be a Cab Sauv, it's going to be something like that.
right.
If I'm having fish or chicken or white, it's going to be a white wine of some kind, like a Chardonnay or
Chard,
something.
right,
So there's very specific ways to do wine that are the right way. And
right.
with mead, I don't think there really is because you can chill it, you can room temp it, you can warm it, you
Sure.
can just pick a different, the styles are so varied and wild that it's really hard, I think, to pick out the nuances without more education around it. Whereas wine, I can walk in and say, "Hey, I'm having steak for dinner. What kind of wine should I drink?"
Right.
And there's the right way to do it. There's no variation or potential for experimentation.
Right. I guess you're 100% right in that regard. I guess what I was meaning more along the lines of there's people that are more educated on the how the product is like th- I don't know how to word it without muddling it up. Like people go to breweries and they drink beer, but like nobody like super hardcore beer nerds will go find out how beer is made and take the brewery tours and stuff like that. It seems like people go to meaderies and I guess wineries maybe a little more to try to learn the aspect of it. I think people go to winery tours more from my experience at least to for the tastings and all that stuff and the tour is just a benefit. But mead drinkers um really are trying to learn more about the product and not so much that the drinkers are but the mead makers because it's so many mead makers that are the ones that are working there in the tap rooms and they're the ones who are directly working with their clientele that they're doing the advocacy and I think they advocate harder for the product and just make a more educated clientele than say wineries or breweries and so I guess maybe the craft beer world may be kind of leaning a little
I
bit that
think
but I still.
craft beer would be another example that they're absolutely more educated. I mean, you can look on like what are the ticker apps?
Untapped
Yeah,
and
yeah,
beer
stuff like
beer
that.
advocate. Yeah,
Right. So I would say that the craft beer people are more like that, like as far as
yeah,
like education goes. And I think that the wineries are as well because they all have their tasting rooms or their tap rooms or
right,
their whatevers, and they all do tours or events around like harvest season or juicing or like we're gonna do the grape stomp or whatever it is. I
right.
think there's a little more like pop culture around it, whereas mead is still sort of ethereal in that respect.
I
So most
gotcha.
people's exposure is like they've read Game of Thrones or Chaucer or Beowulf or something,
Right,
but it doesn't necessarily tell you what it tastes like. And the
sure,
reality is, it can taste like anything.
right.
So it depends on which meadery you go to
Hmm.
or what season it is that you go there. And you're going to have a completely different experience every time you try it. Between mead
Right.
makers, between the mead maker themselves, I I think that the fact that there's what like 750 or 800 meters in the country right now
Something
compared
like
to
that.
something like 9,000 wineries and 12,000 breweries or whatever that
Right,
number is now.
right,
There's a huge difference in just access. And if you look
right.
on the internet and try to look up recipes or how to make mead, a lot of it's not great information.
No,
A lot of it's like old information that people are kind of attached to. So, like we were talking about earlier,
Yeah.
mead takes years to make, and then you can age out all those flavors, or just because it burns when you drink it, that means it's really high alcohol when you haven't added enough sugar to actually hit that alcohol content.
Right.
Um, it's I still think there's a lot of bad information.
True.
I'm not sure. Like, I think the education's getting better because there are a lot more quality meaderies that are showing up in the world, and
Right.
in the U.S. in particular. So I think the education is slowly coming along, and then people like you that do like interviews like this and are a huge advocate for mead, um, you bring it to more people so that they have exposure to it and they have a better chance of getting an experience, or at least looking for something that might appeal to them. So
Right.
I think it's still in process. I don't think I would say that mead people are more educated just yet than like beer and
That's
wine people.
that's fair. I guess I would just y- you're 100% right in that regard that there's still a lot to go through. I just see I guess it's just it's probably my obscured vision of I'm going to meaderies, I'm seeing it firsthand as opposed to
Right.
going to wineries and breweries and stuff, so it just seems so much more prevalent in my face. I guess I it's a personal bias.
Possibly. I mean, I don't know how often you're doing that, so
Oh yeah,
can't really speak to
I,
it.
yeah,
But
I guess I was just more.
I
Yeah,
feel like when you're in the industry doing those sorts of things, and that's kind of your job, you're always going to be exposed to it, so you're always seeing it. And I
right.
feel like that gives you a like a
Rose
microbial.
colored
It's like the
glasses, so
trees
to
for the
speak.
forest kind of thing.
Right,
Um, that you see it all the time, so obviously it's everywhere.
right, and most
But
definitely not.
not really. We're
Not
still
really.
growing. We're still trying to get bigger. We're still trying to get more people to make mead, because there's
Yeah,
not quite enough of us yet, and
I
there's
and
still a lot of people that are like, "What the heck is that?"
that's true, man. When you get asked on a daily basis,
Right.
meat? What kind of meat do you make? How do
Right.
you make meat?
Or I'm in Washington, so it's like, "You make weed? I thought you grew that."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I hadn't even thought about that, but yeah,
Oh
I
yeah.
guess that would be a thing. So it has a question coming in here. It said, what flavors do you make? What local
Ooh.
flavors do you make?
Local
Is it
flavors. Well, about 95% of everything I make is local. So local, I've got like raspberry. Well, actually, let me think about what's in the shop right now. I've got a blackberry. I've got a peach. I have golden plum. I have a sarsaparilla root.
ooh,
I have three different kinds of traditional. I have a
nice.
sizer.
Ooh,
It's made from like
I'm
12 different kinds of apples. Um,
all
what else is in the
right.
shop right now?
So you've got a plethora of stuff in there.
Got all kinds of stuff going. I have pears. I've got
Ooh, I like a pear
whole
meat.
bunch of Carolina Reapers
Ooh, nice.
and scorpion peppers that came in the other day. So those are, I actually have the peach that I have. I split that batch and I make another one that's spicy peach. And it's that hot that just like is warm for like a half an hour, but it doesn't like melt your face off. The problem
Yeah,
tends
I'll try
to be
it.
the next day. The next day it changes your ringtone. Like, it's flipping hot. So,
Really?
oh,
Oh, if
it's
you don't finish
on the
the
way out, it's
bottle,
hot.
huh?
It burns you the second day. Yeah, it doesn't burn you the
Ah,
first day. It's just warm.
gotcha. Holy
But you get like the
cow.
nice the nice sweet peach flavor, and it's got to put a little bit of black tea in it to give you like the tannins,
Yeah,
and then it kind of tricks your palate into how spicy it actually is. You just get like that warm in your mouth that just hangs out, but you get all the flavors that are there. It's
yeah.
nice.
Dude, that's freaking rad. Um, so what is your plans for the future? You've been open for you said opened in 12, so you've been open for
Well,
11 years
when
now.
I
I
started
mean,
the business, I was started selling in 2014. So
okay. So not
we're coming up on 10 years of selling in April of
do
24,
you
I guess.
have any big events planned for that or any anniversary events or anything?
Terrible about that part of it. Um, I I've been trying to find a new location because I outgrew the space pretty early
Oh,
on, and
okay.
I've had probably like 12 locations fall through in the last year. Um, all through either lack of communication on the property owner,
Right.
or commitment, like had contracts in hand that, hey, we're going to do these security upgrades to the building, and then they don't do them, and then like the building has gotten broken into several times, so I'm
Oh yeah,
like,
that
yeah, I'm
doesn't
not
work.
going to do that. So it varies for the reason, but a couple weekends ago, I started doing a new farmers market up in Arlington, Washington.
Okay.
And like the local liquid arts people came up, and one of the city engineers and planners came over, and they're like, "Hey, we're here. You're looking for a new space. We're going to send you some information." And like 2 days later, I had this huge email with, "Here's all the different parts of town that have buildings that meet the requirements and things that you're looking for."
For zoning and whatnot.
Right. Well, they meet your building requirements, not necessarily zoning requirements.
Oh,
And they said, go through and find specific properties in those areas. And when you have more information on the properties, let us know, and we'll create a meeting with the city council, with all the city planners and engineers and everybody that deals with all the permitting processes. And we will make the space that you want work. And we'll just kind of try to fast track that because we want you up here.
holy
So,
cow. That's
right?
impressive.
Yeah, I was stoked.
Dude, congratulations on that, man. That is
right.
top notch.
So now I just need to like have the holiday season slow down just enough so that I can actually go up there and visit spaces and talk to property owners and try to find the right spot, because the current spot is fun. It's challenging to find, and it was great while I was getting started and growing.
Yeah.
But downtown Everett itself has changed enough in the last few years that it's a difficult place to run a business from. It started out that, like, when I was going for, like, the city's been pretty much unhelpful from the beginning. Right. So, like, applying for sign permits for, like, the business aspect of it, I couldn't get signs approved for outside the building because there's a maximum amount of square footage of signage per building square footage, and it was all taken by the buildings on the front, or the businesses on the front side of the building. So they wouldn't approve a sign, so I couldn't put a sign out. So I had a little A-frame that I would walk out every single day, and little like flags and stuff that I would plant in the sidewalk that, hey, I'm here, I'm open today, come say hi. Right. And it got to the point that on production days I would have the door closed, but I'd still have the signs out. And a lot of regulars, because again, there was like 100 of us in the entire country at the time, people would try to find me. And on days that I was doing production, I'd have the big 10 by 10 roll-up door closed. And they'd knock on the door, and I'd open the door, and if anytime they brought new people by, they'd be like, "Oh my God, we found the coolest thing in this alley." And I had the Herald Business Journal was doing this article, and the reporter we had the door open. It was a nice sunny day, and then I get a message from one of my regular customers, "Hey, I'm bringing new people by. Can you close the door?" And I'm like, "Okay, I promise this is not weird. I have to close the door for a minute. You'll see why. It'll be really funny. You'll dig it." I close the door. Yeah. Like a minute goes by. There's this like secret squirrel knock, elaborate thing that goes on. I open the door, and there's like 12 people standing out in front of the door. Whoa. And the reporter's like, "Oh my God, I'm putting this in the article, and I'm not telling them where you are." And I'm like, "Wait, what? Doesn't that kind of defeat the purpose of you being here?" And she's like, No, it'll be fine. And it was. So when she published the article, it's like, you have to go down the alley between Everett and Wetmore Avenue, find the grandest door that you can, and if you do the right knock at the right time, you might find something magical. And I'm like, I hate you and I love you because that's fantastic. Right. And it just sort of like evolved into like the mythology of the business that you kind of have to find it first. So it has this sort of like speakeasy vibe, which I dug it at first. It's hard to run a big
profitable business that way.
Well, profitable is it's relative. Sure. I mean, it's an inexpensive space, but it's challenging when you're trying to get new people to come experience it. Like the diehards will absolutely find you no matter where you are. Right. It's the new people that see that the GPS pin says that I'm in the middle of the building, and while that's accurate, it's unhelpful because you have to go around the back. Yeah. So they're like, "Hey, I don't see a sign because I wasn't allowed to put one up," and they'll give up.
You know what? Okay.
So I have a love-hate with it. And I want, for the longest time, the spaces that I was looking at, I wanted to maintain some aspects of that. Yeah. And have some sort of like nod to that sort of speakeasy-ish, or some sort of like secret thing for people that have been around for a while. Like one of the places I was looking at was an old milking building, because they used to have big slide-out doors that people could drive up their horse and buggy or whatever to pick up their weekly milk. Yeah. And I thought that I could have something for like club members that when they'd come by, they could do their little ring the doorbell or do the secret knock on the door, and then they could swing the door open and, give them their prepaid stuff. And
Yeah,
and move on. But
that'd be wild.
right, yeah. So I want to maintain part of that, or have like, I don't know, like a back lounge or something that you kind of have to know the password or something
Right.
like that to get into it.
Some
Like
air
there's
of
the
mystery
main, like,
about it still.
something, yeah.
Yeah,
But finding a space that has all of those aspects is challenging. And
sure.
then trying to build that into something that doesn't already have some aspect of it, yeah, it's wild.
It yeah,
Commercial real estate is crazy.
it almost seems like one of those things where it's like it's cool if you stumble across it, and it just seems campy if you create it that way. I
Right.
mean, I'm sure there's plenty of places that have created that cool speakeasy vibe, but it's like it's nice when it has that, like, the building had that, like, that air of history about it, and
Right.
it adds to the the
The
whole
mythos.
overall
Yeah.
culture, and the mythos, the meta of the
Right.
meadery.
Yeah. I like I said, I have a love hate with it because I love that part of it. I think it's great for the people that get it, but for the
Right.
people that are trying to find something because they've heard about it and they can't, that's super
Becomes
frustrating.
right, and that's but
And I want to break down barriers, not create more of them.
right. And it's really cool. I mean, all that aside, that the city of Arlington reached out to you specifically, like in person, came out and said, "Hey, we want to work with you."
Yeah.
Email you the plan. So this is what we want to do. You work with us, we'll work with you, and
Yeah.
let's make a business thing happen. Because I think that's
That's huge. Well,
it
Arlington's
is.
growing like crazy right now because like Arlington or Amazon has a new building up there. I think
Oh,
Meta
nice.
has a new building up there.
Yep.
There's, I think their projection is it's like 100,000 or 200,000 new people moving to the area in the next few years, or something ridiculous.
Right.
Um,
Time to get it on the ground
so that
floor of
area is
that.
growing, so it would be a good place to be. And one of the locations is right across from like the Amazon warehouse.
And
So that's like built-in business because those people are clearly sad because they work at Amazon, so they're going to need a drink after work. I'm going to be that guy.
we're And just to be clear, you are looking for a place that's going to be a one-stop production facility, tasting
Yeah.
room, not trying to do
Yeah, I don't want to have
multiple.
to deal with like transfer and bond stuff between locations or any of
Yeah.
that. Um, and I think one of the things that is, I think, important to me is making sure that people can see the process
Hmm.
and then be able to talk about it. So, like when
Right.
homebrewers do come in and they start talking about, well, how do we do this or how do we do that? And go, okay, well, here's like the big commercial version of it, and here's how you do
Right.
that at your table at home, or something similar, or find a way to apply some of the methods that you use commercially to an at-home situation. Because there's a lot of
Yeah.
stuff where like people want to stop fermentation, and you really can't do it very well um, at home without like filtration or like almost not quite freeze concentrating, but like dropping the temperature really low and then
Making like a
racking off a whole bunch of times and letting it sit for a whole long time period of time again and then racking it again.
yes, ice
Whereas for me,
wines.
I can drop the temperature to almost freezing overnight and then the
Yeah.
next day filter off most of the stuff. Or I got a lot of conicals, so I can just dump all the stuff down in the bottom
Right.
and then
And
filter it from there. And I can sterile filter very quickly. And I don't have to rack it 20 times to get anywhere near that and still have concern that if something has residual sugar that it'll re-ferment.
yeah, do you not use potassium metabisulfite or
It
K-meta, K-sorb, any
depends
of that?
what I'm making.
Oh,
So,
but not just across the board.
no, not just across the board. So
Gotcha.
things like, it's a good example, like red fruits. Red fruits tend to go through fermentation and then the color dissipates a little bit.
Hmm.
So what I usually do with those is I put most of my fruit in primary, and then something that has like a red fruit in it, I will reserve about 10% of it and I'll freeze it.
Okay.
After fermentation, after I rack it, and after I go through my like 5 micron filter, I will put that fruit in, or I'll run it through a steam juicer or something to get like that fresh fruit flavor and the fresh colors again. And then
Gotcha.
I will put that in and then filter it again and then filter it down to sterile. In that situation, since it's fresh fruit again, there is risk of another yeast strain being on there. And since I've already filtered out or killed off a lot of the yeast that's in there, or it's gone
Right.
dormant, there's risk of a re-fermentation. So to stop that, I will K-Meta, K-Sulf, and
Gotcha.
throw that in and then filter it,
Well, it's
just to
good.
make absolutely sure.
It's good to know that the microbiologist isn't overly concerned about, you're confident in yeast going dormant in some of your meads rather than having to, stun them to death
Well,
with.
and that's that experiment again. So that very first one of break it into six different parts with six different yeasts and figuring out
Yeah,
what works in your environment, that will tell you what it's going to do. So I know that in my current space, if I'm
yeah,
using Cote de Blanc, I will start whatever my initial gravity is, and it will ferment down to 2.5% bricks
right.
every time in that environment. Because each tank is temperature controlled and all that kind of stuff. And I know if I
Right.
leave it at those temperatures, that's what it's going to
You're
do
gonna,
every time. Even though I'm selecting for higher concentrations, because it's a commercial yeast, they're basically the same thing and they're clones of each other. And I don't reuse yeast except for like some of the wild ones or some of the Kvikes that I've imported. Um,
sure.
I'll just throw a new batch of yeast in every other time. So I know it's
Yeah,
excuse me, ooh,
yeah.
consistent.
That's wild,
Yeah.
man. I love that you're so knowledgeable and confident in your decisions because I talk to so many people who are also equally as confident but don't seem to have the. I mean, maybe their confidence also comes through just trial and error, but I like the fact that yours comes from a place of, you know, scientific understanding and
Which is still trial and error. I mean, the
sure.
difference between science and fucking around is writing it down. So,
That's a very poignant statement, man. I think it's a
yeah, so I've
phenomenal
got lab
jumping.
notebooks with everything in it.
I think it's a phenomenal jumping off point. Thank you so much for joining me today.
No
Like I said,
problem.
this has been a significant amount of time in the making, and it was worth every bit of it, and then some. Anybody who doesn't follow Erik, go follow Aesir Meadery over on Facebook, here on Instagram. I don't know if you do any of the other ones, Twitters or any of that
I
stuff,
have
but
a Twitter. I don't use it because I talk too much, clearly. Uh,
no, that's
I use
the best
Instagram,
part.
Facebook. I have a TikTok, but that was mostly like to support my niece.
Gotcha.
I don't use it because I really don't like being in front of the camera. Um,
Well, I appreciate you joining me
yeah,
actually
no, you're
today.
good.
Well, thank you again
Yeah,
for
no
joining me. And like I said, anybody
problem.
out there, go. One last thing: are you available on Vino Shipper if people want to buy your stuff from out of state?
No, not yet. So since the space is really small, I don't have room for like all the packaging and all of the space that running a club takes up. So I
Right.
don't currently use it. That's been part of the plan is when I get to the new location is to actually start shipping around the country through Vino Shipper, and that's also when the Mead uh, club will start. Is when I have room
Gotcha.
for that and like storage for people that don't pick up their stuff. So
Right.
sarsaparilla. Yeah, I'm working on
That's
it,
it.
man.
Go sarsaparilla root. Yes, I'm sure that one's phenomenal as
That,
well.
that
I,
has a gold medal from the Mazur Cup. So yeah, it's
oh,
not
yeah, so
terrible.
yeah, it's fun. So yeah, it does kind of good occasionally.
It's okay.
It's okay. Well, thank you again one
Yeah,
more
thank
time
you.
for joining me. Anybody, like I said, go follow us here at Meadery. If you're in the Washington area, go pick up some of their stuff. If you're not, find someone that is and have them proxy for you.
Yeah, I do farmers markets kind of all over the place. I do lots of events and holiday markets.
Yeah.
The meadery itself is by reservation these days because COVID kind of caused me to turn it into all production, and I've got equipment for the new space, which I can't use yet. So basically, it's just full. Um, and other
Yeah.
than that, I've got vendors all over the state. So whether or not they have anything is kind of up in the air because they tend to go through it pretty quick when I drop stuff off. So
I'll tell
yeah,
you what, if you guys are interested in getting some of hold Eric stuff, get a hold of me and we'll figure out a way
there we
together
go.
to get you some of Eric's
That
stuff.
works. Yeah, that works.
Right on, brother. Well, have a good rest of your
You too,
evening,
sir.
and I will be looking forward to speaking with you in the future, my man.
Absolutely. Let me know when you're back in the area. We'll go grab a beverage.
Oh, 100% for sure. Later on,
Well,
man.
have a night.
So, thank you everybody for joining me tonight. Like I said, that's been about 2 years in the making. I've been dying to talk to Eric, and it was worth every bit of it. It was a phenomenal chat. He was such a knowledgeable guy, and that's why I wanted him to be able to talk with you guys so you guys can learn from that knowledge. So next week I should be on with the bird and the badger, the bee and the badger. It's a Kickstarter meadery coming out of Texas. They just put their Kickstarter up. I wanted to give them an opportunity to come on and get their name out there and um, talk about a new meter that's coming up there in Texas. So I'll be on there next Wednesday, about the same time, Wednesday evening, and we'll be live again doing that same thing. So thank you, everybody, for joining me tonight. And yes, any questions that didn't get answered, shoot them over to Erik at aesirmeadery.com down there in the comments. Maybe somebody's not paying attention down there. So yeah, feel free, again, questions over at Erik at aesirmeadery.com. Have a phenomenal night, everybody, and I'll see you next week. Peace.